The store was empty when I arrived for my night shift. The place always had an eerie stillness after closing, but tonight, something felt different. The air was heavier, thick with an unexplainable tension. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, and the sound echoed through the empty aisles. I swallowed the lump in my throat and walked toward the employee locker room to store my bag. It was just another shift, or so I told myself. My job was simple: stock shelves, keep the floor clean, and wait for the early morning delivery. The manager had left hours ago, leaving me alone with the dim hum of the fluorescent lights. As I grabbed my scanner and wheeled out a cart of inventory, the intercom crackled above me. Static, just a brief burst, then silence. I glanced up at the speaker, my pulse quickening. That system only worked when someone used a microphone in the back office. I shook it off and started unloading boxes onto the shelves. Cereal, canned goods, snack foods. The monotony of stocking was almost comforting. But then I heard it, a soft shuffling sound, coming from the next aisle over. I froze. The store was locked. No customers. No employees but me. I leaned forward, peering around the end cap. Nothing. The aisle was empty. Just rows of soup cans lined up in perfect order. The sound must have been my imagination, or maybe a rat scurrying along the floor. I returned to my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. An hour passed. I kept my mind occupied, focusing on my tasks. But then, as I walked past the freezer section, something made me stop. The glass doors reflected the dim glow of the store's overhead lights. But in one of them, just barely visible, was a shape. A shadow standing near the checkout lanes. My breath caught in my throat. I turned around fast, scanning the area. No one was there. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I wasn't imagining things. I knew I saw something. I exhaled sharply and forced myself to move. The store was playing tricks on me. It had to be. I kept working, but every so often, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. A flicker of something just out of sight. The store's cameras would prove I was just being paranoid, so I made my way to the back office. The small room was cramped, filled with old paperwork and a computer that looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. I clicked into the security feed and rewound the footage. My fingers trembled slightly as I scrubbed through the timeline. I watched myself stocking shelves, pacing the aisles, pausing at the freezer section. Then I saw it. A figure, dark and indistinct, standing near the registers. I squinted at the screen. The image was grainy, but there was no doubt someone was there. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, watching. I skipped ahead. 1 minute later, it was gone. My stomach twisted. I wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone to call the manager, but before I could dial, the store's intercom let out another burst of static. Then a voice distorted, low, barely a whisper. "Backer." I dropped the phone. The sound had come from right above me. I stared at the intercom speaker in the office, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't sticking around to figure this out. My hand shook as I picked up my phone and keys. I needed to get out. As I turned to leave, the office door slammed shut on its own. The force rattled the shelves. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. My breathing turned shallow as I gripped the doorknob and twisted. It wouldn't budge. Something scraped against the other side of the door. A slow, deliberate sound, like nails dragging across the wood. I swallowed a scream. Then a whisper, right outside the door. "You saw me." I shoved my weight against the door. It burst open, sending me stumbling into the hallway. The air was ice cold. My breath formed a cloud in front of me as I sprinted for the front entrance. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silent store. I reached the doors and slammed my hand against the glass. They didn't budge. Locked. Panic surged through me. I turned around, searching for another way out. And that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the aisle, its face obscured by the shadows. Tall, unmoving, watching me. The store lights flickered. The bulbs buzzed and popped, plunging the aisles into near darkness. My breathing came in ragged gasps as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The figure was gone. I didn't waste another second. I ran for the stockroom. There was an emergency exit back there. My sneakers squeaked against the tile as I sprinted, each step echoing in the emptiness. My fingers fumbled at the handle, yanking the door open. Cold air rushed in. Freedom. I turned for one last look inside. The store was silent, still, as if nothing had happened. But as I stepped outside, I swore I heard the intercom crackle one last time. A single word whispered through the static. Soon, I didn't look back. Now, let's continue listening to the next story. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. Strange things happen sometimes. Doors creak, lights flicker, houses settle. But there's always a logical explanation. At least, that's what I told myself. Until last night. I worked the closing shift at a small 24-hour convenience store. It's not the best job, but it pays the bills, and most nights are uneventful. The occasional drunk customer, a bored teenager trying to shoplift a candy bar. Nothing I can't handle. But last night, something was different. Something was wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Normally, the store had a low, constant hum. Refrigerators running, the buzzing of overhead lights, the occasional beep of the register. But as the clock neared 3 a.m., everything felt muted, like the whole place was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just tired. Then, the motion sensor near the back of the store chimed. It's an old sensor. It dings when someone steps into the frozen food aisle, letting the cashier know a customer is there. But I was alone. I knew I was alone. I hadn't seen a single person in over an hour. I leaned over the counter and squinted toward the aisle, expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a stray cat that had wandered in. But there was nothing. The aisle was empty. The glass doors of the freezers reflected only the dim glow of the flickering fluorescent bulbs. I felt a chill crawl on my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out from behind the counter, my shoes scuffing against the tile floor. "Hello," I called, forcing my voice to stay steady. No answer. The air felt thick, heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I walked slowly, scanning the aisles. The sensor must have malfunctioned. That had to be it. I reached the back of the store and checked the security mirror in the corner. Nothing. Just empty aisles, stocked shelves, and the faint reflection of my own tense face. Then the chime rang again. I spun around, my heart hammering. The sound had come from the front of the store this time, near the entrance. But the doors hadn't opened. No one had come in. I was sweating now. My palms were clammy, my breath shallow. I turned back toward the counter, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there. And then I saw it. The security monitor behind the register flickered. For a split second, one of the cameras showed a figure standing at the end of the chip aisle. A dark shape, too tall, too still. I whirled around. The aisle was empty. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look back at the screen. The figure was gone. My hands trembled as I reached for the store's landline, ready to call my manager, the police, anyone. But the moment I picked up the receiver, the power cut out. The store was plunged into darkness. I stood frozen, the silence pressing against my ears. Then the only sound, the beeping of the cash register rebooting. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor. And then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the stockroom in the back. My pulse pounded in my throat. I backed toward the door, fumbling for my keys. I didn't care about locking up, didn't care about my job. I just needed to get out. The footsteps stopped. I turned my head ever so slightly, just enough to glance down the darkened aisle. Something moved. A figure stood at the end, half hidden in shadow. It was wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move like a person. I ran. I slammed through the front doors, the bell above them jingling wildly as I stumbled into the empty parking lot. The cold night, air hit my lungs like a punch. I turned, panting, expecting to see the thing following me. But the store was empty. The lights flickered back on. The power had returned, and everything looked normal. No figure, no strange noises, just a silent, empty convenience store glowing under the fluorescent lights. I didn't go back inside. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield for a full hour before I drove away. I didn't even lock the doors. When I returned for my next shift, my manager met me at the entrance. "What happened last night?" he asked, frowning. "You left the register open, and the back room light was on." I didn't answer. I just stared past him through the glass doors at the security monitor behind the counter. It was frozen on a single frame. The camera feed from the frozen food aisle, and standing in the middle of the aisle, clear as day, was the figure. Now, let's continue listening to the next story. The parking lot was nearly empty when I stepped outside. A few scattered cars sat beneath the flickering streetlights, their windshields glinting in the dim glow. The night air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin as I adjusted the strap of my bag over my shoulder. The store had been quiet all night, just me and the dull hum of machines working in the background. But as I locked up, something in the air felt off. I turned toward my car, parked a few rows away. My footsteps echoed against the pavement, an odd contrast to the stillness around me. The buzzing of the nearest streetlight seemed louder than usual, and I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I glanced around, but the lot was empty. Just my imagination, I told myself. I was tired, ready to get home. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and started the engine. The familiar rumble calmed me a little, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. I checked my rearview mirror and saw nothing but darkness behind me. Still, a knot of unease twisted in my stomach as I pulled out of the lot and onto the main road. The drive home was short, maybe 10 minutes. The roads were mostly empty this late at night, and the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows that danced along the pavement. As I turned onto a smaller road that cut through a wooded area, the unease in my chest grew. The trees loomed over the street, their branches swaying slightly in the night breeze. It was too quiet. No other cars, no distant hum of traffic, just my own tires against the asphalt. Halfway down the road, my headlights caught something ahead, a figure standing just off the shoulder, barely illuminated by the beams. My grip on the wheel tightened as I slowed down slightly. The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still, facing the road. As I passed, I turned my head for a better look. My stomach flipped. It was a man, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could see that he was staring directly at me. I pressed my foot against the gas, heart hammering. Just some random guy, I told myself. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe he was lost. But as I glanced at the mirror again, my breath caught in my throat. He was gone. The side of the road was empty. No sign of movement. No trace of anyone standing there at all. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to focus on the road. I was letting my mind get carried away. But deep down, I couldn't shake the icy fear creeping up my spine. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car for a moment, fingers clenched around the steering wheel. My porch light was on, casting a small pool of warmth onto the pavement. Home. Safe. But as I stepped out, the feeling returned. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was standing just behind me. I turned sharply, eyes scanning the street, the yard, the shadowed edges of my neighbor's house. Nothing. I hurried inside, locking the door the second I was over the threshold. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that felt thick, heavy. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my bag on the counter, and went to the sink for a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I needed to calm down. I took a deep breath, sipping the water slowly. I was being ridiculous. I worked a long shift. My mind was just playing tricks on me. That was all. Then I heard it, a soft tapping sound. I froze, my grip tightening around the glass. It was coming from the front door. Not a knock, just a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I turned my head slowly, barely breathing. My front door had a small window at the top, but it was too high up to see through from where I stood. The tapping continued, rhythmic and patient. I set the glass down, moving as quietly as I could toward the door. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched through the house. I swallowed hard and reached for the peephole, pressing my eye against it. Nothing. The porch was empty. Just a faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the trees. I exhaled, stepping back. Maybe a branch had been tapping against the frame. Or maybe some kid messing around. I turned to go back to the kitchen. Then the door handle rattled. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Someone was on the other side. Someone was trying to get in. I bolted for my phone, fumbling to unlock it with trembling fingers. Before I could dial, the handle went still. The quiet stretched again, long and suffocating. I stared at the door, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting. A shadow moved across the peephole. I barely held in a gasp. Whoever it was, they were still there, standing just outside, watching. Then footsteps, slow and measured, moving away. I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then, cautiously, I crept back to the door and looked outside again. The porch was empty. The street was empty. But something deep in my gut told me it wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room, lights on, every noise making me jump. Hours passed, the darkness outside shifting into the pale blue of early morning. I tried to convince myself it had just been a random prowler, some idiot testing doors. But deep down, I knew better, because when I finally worked up the courage to check outside, I saw them. Footprints, leading from the street to my door. Clear impressions in the dew-covered grass, but no footprints leading away.